The WHO was saying that countries like Nigeria or Kenya could run out of medication, and that's because most countries have relied on aid in having these drugs available for their citizens. But now that this been cut, it's definitely going to impact people's access to these drugs. For example, I know there's an NGO in Nigeria that used to offer free PrEP for citizens and for people. Sometime in the wake of this cut, they put out an announcement to say they won't be doing that anymore because they no more have access to bringing in these drugs. There's data from South Africa saying that there's been reduced testing in lots of communities, and this has been because both the testing and the treatment have mostly relied on aid from the US, for example.
Emmanuel Cherem is a 25-year-old gay man living in Abuja. Like Echezona, he asked that we not show his face. He's trying to stay fit and healthy in the wake of testing positive.
I will blame myself, and I equally blame the Trump administration because, these things were available and then without prior notice, these things were cut off. And I will equally blame the Nigerian government because I have known that, prior to this moment, we've always been told that, these things were coming from the USA and all of that. So what it meant was that there was no national plan for the eradication and making sure that people don't contract HIV.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about Africa, okay? Because some of the countries in Africa, they are now panicking. They're in a full-blown panic, and they're lashing out at the Trump administration because of the decision to cut USAID funding. And one of the reasons why they're in a full-blown panic is because of the spread of HIV and AIDS in Africa that is happening as a result of what they say, right? They're basically blaming the Trump administration, saying, well, it's his fault, okay? Because Africa was not prepared for this, and that Africa, these countries cannot afford their own medications. They can't afford to take care of their own civilians. So therefore, it's the fault of President Trump because U.S. taxpayers are supposed to pay for these types of medications for Africans, right? Even though they're not taxpayers, I don't think that we should be on the hook for their health, right? They don't pay for our health, right? But apparently we're supposed to pay for their health, and it is President Trump's fault. President Trump takes some of the blame for the decisions that the citizens, the civilians of Africa in some of these countries have made, right? And I want to talk about it because you have a particular group of men who are lashing out at President Trump over the spread of HIV and AIDS in some of these African countries like South Africa and Nigeria. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
Waking up with so much enthusiasm, and then suddenly you remember this is something you have to live with for a while, technically all your life.
The voice you hear is that of a 30-year-old gay man named Echezona, living in Asaba, Nigeria. He asked to be identified only by his first name for fear of stigma, and that Reuters not show his face. Echezona is struggling to come to terms with a life-changing reality. In May, he was diagnosed with HIV. He admits he should have been more careful about practicing safe sex.
That was the only regret I had. I still have.
But
yeah, I think that, when you look at who's to blame, right? When you talk about, well, who's responsible for this? I don't know how much lube and condoms cost in Africa, right? I'm not sure, right? But, hey, ultimately, it is your personal responsibility. Like, the type of sexual behaviors that, you engage in, sexual activities, it's your responsibility at the end of the day. It's nobody else's responsibility. And, hey, this is, kind of what you have to deal with when, you aren't practicing, safe sex, right? That's just what it is.
Echezona, like millions across Africa, had come to rely on a U.S.-supplied medication that can prevent HIV transmission. In January, U.S. President Donald Trump announced cuts to aid programs that supplied the drug globally. The United Nations has warned of a dramatic surge in new HIV infections if the cuts remain in place.
We may be having 2,000 new infections every day, more new infections every day.
Until recently, Echezona was one of millions of Africans taking pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. PrEP is normally given as a daily pill. and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control says it can reduce the risk of HIV transmission through sex by 99% when taken consistently. According to UN data, sub-Saharan Africa had 390,000 AIDS-related deaths in 2023, or 62% of the global total. But progress had been made. That death toll was down by 56% from 2010, according to the World Health Organization. That drop in deaths occurred at a time when PrEP use ballooned across the continent. According to the global tracker PrEPWatch, the number of patients who had taken at least one dose of the treatment leapt from fewer than 700 in 2016 to more than 6 million by late 2024. The U.S. financed more than 90% of new PrEP doses last year. The agency that delivered the bulk of the assistance is known as the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR. It's the world's leading HIV/AIDS initiative. But Trump ordered a 90-day pause on foreign aid soon after taking office in January, and he issued stop work orders for grants funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Restrictions on PrEP have coincided with dwindling supplies of more widely used HIV prevention tools like condoms and lubricants, quote, because of the U.S. funding cuts, according to a UN AIDS fact sheet from May. The combination is creating what 9 activists and 3 medical experts described as a major threat to prevention across the continent. And some who've lost access to PrEP are now testing positive for HIV, according to 10 patients, health officials, and activists. 4 PrEP users in Nigeria, all gay or bisexual men, told us they have tested positive since January when they stopped being able to get more pills.
Someone must have committed suicide on getting the news that he or she is positive just because there was lack of PrEP for prevention. Might not take it so well as I am, so I just pray and wish that Trump actually changes his policy and everything comes back to normal.
You know, I think that what they actually should be wishing for is for these countries to get on their feet, right? These countries to become self-sufficient, for them to be able to provide these medications, contraceptives, and other things as well, too, to the people, right? So that they're not dependent on a foreign country, right? Again, I think stories like this are a great example why we shouldn't be dependent on China, right? I mean, again, you know, this is Africa, but look at what happened when they were dependent on the United States of America, right? All of a sudden, you had somebody else come in, a new president, and they decided, hey, you know, we're going to cut it off, right? We're going to cut this off. We can't afford it anymore. We don't want to do this. Now they're suffering because they were overly reliant on the United States of America, okay, when it comes to very important medications, right? That significantly affects the health of the population. Now, again, you know, I don't see that is that much different, right? When you talk about being reliant on foreign countries for goods, like, for example, prescription drugs, or when you talk about, from a national security perspective, being reliant on them for steel and other key resources, right, that you would need in order to, for example, make weapons or to build ships or to build military equipment. Like, stories like this, the reason why I'm covering this story is because it is a warning about what happens when you become overly reliant on other nations, right? No nation should be overly reliant on another nation for, again, key resources and key goods, especially when you talk about a continent like Africa, okay? And some of these countries like Nigeria. Nigeria is an oil-rich country, right? They're an oil-rich country. I don't understand how is it that they can't afford medications for their population. Also, on top of that, I can't fail to mention that, you know, the best way to prevent this type of stuff is to refrain from having sex, right? To engage in, you know, celibacy or, you know, again, just not engaging in, you know, some of these risky activities, especially, again, if you don't have contraceptives, right? If you don't have it, then you might want to be like, you know what? Let me refrain unless I can do this in a way that is safe, right? Or safer, okay? And, you know, I'm just saying that these countries, again, clearly were overly reliant on the United States of America. And again, you see what happens when a country becomes overly reliant, when they can't produce their own goods, their own services, when they can't fund themselves, right? And the medications and the key goods and resources that they need, this is what happens, right? So again, I am hoping personally that these African nations can get on their feet and that they can afford to take care of their populations, right? Because I don't think that U.S. tax dollars should be funneled into Africa to pay for things that their government should be paying for, right? Their governments should be providing these resources to their population. But regardless, that does not stop at least a certain group of people in Africa from blaming Trump, right? They're blaming Trump after they recently got diagnosed with HIV. So let's read about this. Gay men in Africa are blaming President Trump's decision to cut funding for HIV/AIDS prevention for their diagnosis of the virus. The administration's sweeping cuts to foreign aid have reduced access to medications like pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP, which decreases the risk of contracting HIV by 99%. Emmanuel Cheram, 25, a gay man in Nigeria, told Reuters that he tested positive for HIV 2 months after losing access to the U.S. supplied drug. Yeah, so, I mean, listen, if you lost access to the drug, then you know that, hey, you know what, I probably should be careful about engaging in these activities, again, without some other form of contraceptive to prevent me from, catching this disease, right? And this person, decided that, hey, you know what, I'm still going to participate in these activities despite not having access to the medications. And, this happened. I mean, I don't understand how you can blame Trump for this, right? Now, again, to be fair to the guy, he's saying that he blames himself. Taking care of himself is his first duty as a person. This is what he said. But he also says, I equally blame the Trump administration because, these things were available. And then without prior notice, these things were cut off. Another 30-year-old gay man from Nigeria told Reuters that he took PrEP pills daily for 3 years until he was told by a clinic worker that the drug was now only available to pregnant and lactating women. I just pray and wish that Trump actually changes his policy and everything comes back to normal so that the spread and transmission of the virus would be reduced, he said. Trump issued an executive order on his first day in office that paused foreign development assistance for 90 days, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio signed a stop work order to employees of the State Department Office of Foreign Assistance. The department oversees the U.S. Agency for International Development and the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which have seen drastic cuts since Trump took office. The administration has defended its position, arguing that other countries need to shoulder the burden of providing aid. Yeah, I mean, this is true. That's exactly what they need to do. They need to shoulder the burden, right? At the end of the day, it shouldn't be up to taxpayers to pay for other, countries, other citizens, and the diseases that, they get, right? I mean, again, this is something that I don't feel like is controversial, right? We have provided a lot of aid for years, right? For years and years and years. You can't get mad when all of a sudden we say, hey, you know what, we're good, right? We've helped you. We've given you enough time to get on your feet, right? To do what you got to do, right? And now, you're out on your own, right? You got to handle it. You got to take care of it. Hopefully, a lot of people are going to start spending a lot of money. Trump added, I've talked to other nations. We want them to chip in and spend money too. And we spent a lot, he continued. And it's a tremendous problem going on in many countries. A lot of problems going on. The United States always gets the request for money. Nobody else helps. Yeah, I think other nations should chip in too, right? When you have liberals turn around and point the finger at us, say, oh, you're causing people to die because you cut funding to USAID. And it's like, no, what about all these other countries? What about all these other countries that are also rich that don't contribute as much as we contribute? Do they take responsibility? Do they shoulder some of the burden, right, for what happens, right? They never point the finger at anybody else except us. But again, they think that, because of the history of colonialism, right, this is what they believe, that basically we have to provide aid to the global South into perpetuity, right, that we owe them for what happened to their countries or their continent during colonialism. This is what they believe, right? This is what they believe. Russell Vought, the director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, echoed Trump's stance during a congressional committee meeting in early June. He argued that African countries should take on the responsibility of fighting HIV/AIDS, alleviating the financial burden on the U.S. Vought added that some of the nonprofits facilitating HIV prevention programs are not geared towards the viewpoints of the administration. The director's comments are in line with a waiver issued to PrEPFAR programs on February 1st, allowing prevention programs to restart only for pregnant mothers. Vulnerable populations like members of the LGBTQIA+ community, sex workers, or injecting drug users weren't included in the prevention measures. PrEPFAR grants often cover the cost of clinics supplying PrEP at public health centers for these populations, which have suffered closures due to decreased funding. A spokesperson for the State Department told Reuters that PrEPFAR-funded programs would continue to be reviewed for assessment of programmatic efficiencies and consistency with the United States foreign policy. Public officials and activists fear that if Trump's hardline policy towards foreign aid stays consistent, HIV infections will continue in the region. Linda Gale Becker, an HIV expert at the University of Cape Town, said that African countries may not cover the expense of supplying the drug, leaving a gap for more diagnoses. Quote, "It's as predictable as if you take your eye off a smoldering bushfire and the wind is blowing, a bushfire will come back," she told Reuters. Yeah, well, again, this is up to the African countries to handle themselves, right? To take care of themselves, right? To pull themselves up and to, use their resources more efficiently, right? Africa has a ton of natural resources, minerals, all types of things that they can use in order to get back on their feet. If some of these countries weren't so corrupt, right? If the leadership was better, okay, in regards to how they use their resources, then I think that they would be in a better place. So again, ultimately, it's up to them, okay? It's not that I don't feel bad for some of the population, particularly, again, you talk about the pregnant mothers and stuff like that. But, hey, it's one of those things where at the end of the day, it's not our job, right? It's not our fault as taxpayers that this is happening. And that means that we shouldn't shoulder the burden of it. Ultimately, these countries, they got to take care of themselves, right? And, it is what it is, okay? It is what it is. That or, go to China, right? Go ask China for some help. Because, they say that China, they're a superpower, right? So I don't understand why is that they don't go to the Chinese. Go to the Chinese, okay, and see if they can help you out, right? See if they can, get you, the funding that you need or, the drugs that you need and go from there, right? But I'm just saying, when it comes to the United States of America, we've done a lot, right? We've done a lot for the world. And at some point, the world has to, stand on their own, right? They got to stand on their own. And hey, it is what it is. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.